Welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabrielle Nicolay, and I am joined today by Martha Hoffman. Martha, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Tell the good people a little bit about yourself and who you are, what you do, all the things.
Yeah, as you said, I'm Martha Hoffman. I am the founder and CEO of Grounded Learning, based here in Washington, D.C. And really, I help students, families, parents, the whole family unit, when a child is either having a really hard time in school or already been diagnosed with a disability, helping families to navigate what that process looks like, both with school and at home, and all the things that need to happen to kind of get kids the support they need.
So, how come you're not just supporting the kid?
Great question. It's easy. I have about 20 years experience here in DC working in schools, teacher, special education coordinator, all sorts of roles. And it's easy to just look at, an issue and turn to a parent and say, here are 5 things you could try and see what sticks. That's almost the impulse, like solve the problem, solve the problem. But that's not my approach now for many reasons. So number one, I know that like each family member, we don't operate in isolation, right? We are a unit as a family, whether it's 2 people or 6 people in this home. What's going on with one is going on with all. So parents come to me, they want support for their child, they have questions, they're trying to figure it out. And I can share answers, ideas, resources. I can often answer many of their questions. But when we can also dig into what's this doing for you, mom or dad or auntie or whomever, how is it impacting you? What's the relationship like? How do you feel talking about it to others? Do you have people you can talk to about it? Like, are you just drowning in a to-do list of things you should be doing and feel bad that you can't get to them all? Like, that's part of the picture as well. And I don't want to ignore that because then we kind of perpetuate this idea of like, fix one problem and move on. Or if we find this one solution, everything will be fine. And I don't think that kids are problems to be fixed. So I think when we take that more holistic approach, looking at the whole family and the impact on everyone, then we can get some things in place that support everyone.
Will you give us a for instance? Because I think sometimes people are like, yeah, of course it affects everybody, but I have a to-do list that's a mile long, and there are other kids in the home who need to be driven to various places, and like
Yep.
we have a schedule, and Thanksgiving is coming and the holidays are coming, and like the churn is real.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just like break it down in terms of like what is it that can happen?
Sure. Sure. I had a call with someone last week that initially reached out to me to ask if I did tutoring. Literacy is kind of my specialty, literacy and ADHD, and that combo especially. And they reached out initially just thinking, I want to schedule some tutoring. And I asked some questions. And where we finally landed was, yes, tutoring could be appropriate, but it's not the priority right now. As you said, like the holidays are coming up. They had just traveled for a long time. They felt like they were still getting into the back to school routine. The parent shared, after school is still kind of a nightmare. We haven't even figured out lunches yet because I've got a picky eater, right? There were all these things. And mom was really honest and just said, I feel like I'm failing at all of them. And so I shared, what if we don't add something else to your plate then right now? What if you keep me in your back pocket and we hang on a second? Let's look at all the things you are doing. What's worthwhile? What's, worth the output that you're putting in, the money, the time, the energy. What can we say no to right now? And then when might this work? So for this particular family, it was like one sporting event was going to pause until spring because they didn't need to play winter ball. They were going to wait to work with me until January because they wanted to get into the back to school routine. Again, this had just come from traveling from there were just so many other factors, and I didn't want to ignore those. I said, you could hire me. I could come in next week. I could be there at 3 o'clock every day, ready to tutor. And you're going to be stressed. Your child then is going to feel that stress. They're not going to feel really supported. They're just going to feel like it's one more box to check. So in reality, I actually said, like, you're not ready yet, right? Like, let's talk in 3 months and we're going to stay in touch. And she wanted some support in other ways about what else to deprioritize. But we decided that I'm actually not going to work with that child directly until the new year
Mhm.
because that's not the priority right now.
Okay, so just for anybody who's listening who's like, is that allowed? Like, are we allowed to like do less, not only do less, but do less do fewer therapies,
Yes.
do fewer interventions. This is a really interesting thing. And I think just like if I'm gonna zoom up just 30,000 feet for just a second, the younger your child is, the arguably the more intense we're going to go, except that that child still has to have playtime and still has to
Yep.
have nap time and still has
Yep.
to have a regular bedtime. I literally on this podcast not so long ago said, I have arrived at houses where the child was asleep and the parent said, oh, just hold on a second, I'll get them up. And I was like, absolutely not. You may not get
Let
your
them
child up.
sleep. Yes.
Children need to sleep. So there's a hierarchy of needs, obviously. And again, if we're dealing with 2-year-olds, maybe we're going to implement, because they have more free time, we're going to schedule things a little bit differently than we would for this other guy who sounds like he's a little bit older.
Yep.
And
Yep.
yet it is what I hear you saying is there's a continuum, there's a balance.
Yep.
And I like to tell families this too. We live in the real world.
Yeah.
Where, people have finances and they have schedules and they have jobs. And they have other relationships.
Yes. Yes. This comes up in the summer a lot too. I'll have families at the beginning of the summer, like, they have off from school, so let's do all the things. And I'm like, yep. And part of all the things includes they got to get dirty. They got to sweat every day. They got to play with some friends. I want to see some skinned knees. I mean, right. Not to be silly, but that's part of summer. And that all has value. So having them work with me 3 hours a day, 5 days a week is not what your child really needs, me or somebody else. Now, again, I'm not saying intervention and very specific therapies aren't appropriate, but we do have to look at the big picture. And if you're in the car for 2 hours a day in order to make all those things happen, that takes a toll on a family.
Yeah. It is this, I think as soon as families find out that there's, that a family member has a diagnosis, there's automatically, and you can speak to this a little bit more too, this sense of like, okay, well, we have to do all the things, everything that anybody recommends immediately, in the hopes that, one of them is gonna fix the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rather than sort of a more holistic approach, which does involve, and we know this from neuroscience, interestingly, right? Which is like happy brains are brains that play.
Yep.
Right? Learning brains are happy brains that play.
Uh-huh.
So like all of learning derives from connection and play. So
yeah.
Like if we've got a kid who's totally stressed out after school, and now we're going to like sit him with another person who's going to make demands on him.
Right.
It's not going to go so well.
Right. Yeah. In a place, in an area that's already hard for them,
So talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
So, again, I do work with students directly, but I primarily work with families, and often if they're saying like, okay, well then what can I say no to? And I will ask, like, what do they love? What do they hate? Your child needs to feel success. So whether that's in a sport or in a subject that they really like, if they're all about science but struggling in reading, let's lean into that. They've got to feel wins, because if you have struggled in school year after year after year after year, you forget what it feels like to be really successful in school, right? And I was kind of that student growing up. So we have to find these spots of success, of pride, of confidence for kids, to remind them what that feels like. So, parents are always asking me, what can I do at home to enhance reading development, which I think is a great question. And there's so much we can do. But the first thing I say is, you don't have to teach them how to read. I mean, unless you're homeschooling your child, like your kid's in school, we're going to work with the school and figure that out. The teachers are trained. That could be a whole other episode for another time. But what do I want you to do with them? What do they love? Do they love Greek mythology? Then I'm going to have you snuggle up and read the Percy Jackson series to them and build that, because they're into it. You can get into it. And then all of a sudden we have this joyful experience around reading, because other times that they read, it's hard for now. It's not easy yet. So let's find a way to build something that's joyful or fun or built into your interest. So anything that I recommend for families to do at home is either a game or how to find what they love to read and read them with them, or do a book club with an auntie that's, far on on the West Coast, and they once a week call up and say, I read chapters 2 and 3. Let's talk. Like things like that that feel light, that feel almost
Oh,
playful, that feel
yes.
joyful. I don't need you to go home and drill your child with sound cards for 30 minutes every night. Nobody wants us to do that.
It's so interesting. And because I have seen a couple of families recently where this has been the case, where they're really like, you know, parents of a 3-year-old who want to drill colors, and it's not fun for anybody. Like I think I was kind of thinking about why that's even happening. And I think what it comes down to is it's like the one thing that they know that they should do, or the kid's supposed to know, or something like that.
Yep.
And so they can help their child learn something that their child needs to know at some point. But it's
Yep.
so off key.
Yeah.
And it's not fun. And I just think if it's not, I one of the things I do in my practice is something we call screenless coaching, which is I can see the room, right? But I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
to the child, to the parent, through a headset. So now I can direct the action a little bit, right? So I can tell
Mm-hmm.
parent, slow this down, speed this up, see what happens if you go over to this part of the room. Like I can kind of, the parent becomes my avatar. One of the reasons I do that, and one of the reasons I love it, and one of the reasons it works so well to elicit language from children, to
Mm-hmm.
decrease problematic behaviors from children, is because what you get is this very open flow of energy
Mm-hmm.
between the parent and the child, that is like this open channel of delightfulness. And
Yeah.
right, which is, and I can see on your face, you get this, right? This is at the root of everything that every therapist hopefully is doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and actually, probably, hopefully, every person who's interacting with a child. Um,
Sure.
and if we're good, we bring that into our adult relationships. That's more complicated, but
I know. I know. But it's like there's almost a sense of relief. The amount of
yes,
times I've said to a parent, we have these things called roll and read. Here's the piece of paper. Here's the dice you're going to roll and play this with them and make it a bingo. And they're like, wait, this is my reading homework. I'm going to do with the relief.
yeah,
I get to play a game with them. I get to, jump on the concrete squares out front while we're doing, rhyming. Like what? And I'm not saying that to, I hope not at all sound condescending, that it could be that simple. I don't mean that, but I just mean that those embedded interactions throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the months, they add up, and they're both learning and connection, and just the combination of both is so powerful.
it's so powerful. I mean, literally, there is no learning without that
Mhm.
connected state.
Yep.
And so you've worked in schools long enough to know, like, an excellent teacher is aware of that at every moment, and
Yes.
is
Yes.
constantly testing the air and recreating that relationship, and giving this one the extra and this one the job and that
Yep.
one the, like, it's an art.
Yeah, it sure is.
um
Can I share another example that might be
yeah,
controversial? You
please.
said something about like the shoulds, right? The things we're supposed to do. Like, oh, my child needs blank. Then there's this list. This website told me I should do this, do this, do this. One that I know I will get some slack for, but homework, I have some opinions about.
Please share all the
And
opinions.
the permission I want to give parents is, if you have a child that's expected to do homework and it is impacting your relationship with them, or impacting dinner time, or impacting sleep time, or impacting their ability to connect with you or their siblings or a friend, I give you permission to talk to the school and say, this homework is not working for my child. What is the benefit? What is the intended purpose? Okay, that's not happening. What can we do that would serve that purpose? Because I've pushed on this in some areas, and once I talk to teachers, they're like, "Oh my god, I had no idea you're doing this till 9 o'clock at night. Oh my god, it's taking 4 hours. Oh my god, they're crying every night. I had no idea." It's not any ill intention from a teacher. So teachers don't come for me. I've been there. I assigned that homework. And when I was a teacher and started to customize homework, and there were certain students every year that I would say to their parent, I need you to snuggle and read every night. And that's what you're going to do for 3 months and then report back to me. Like, again, the relief in that, because that's some precious time after school. And I know that some schools have gotten better. I mean, my kid's school doesn't even do homework now until third grade, which I think is an improvement.
And
But
even that
again,
though, that's early. I mean, the
it
research
is.
would say fourth or fifth. Yeah.
I know. I know.
Um,
And that's what I want parents to hear too, because there's not research to support that we need it when they're young. So if that's destroying your night, here's your pass to call the school and say, hey, this isn't working. Who can I talk to about coming up with another plan for homework? What else can this look like? Because that, I think, that can get us into that cycle of just like dreading after school and just trying to hang on until the weekend. And we got to be able to do more than just get through to the weekend.
yeah. Yeah. That is, yeah, you heard it here. You heard it here, folks. Permission slips. I'm in the business of permission slips also.
Yep. Yep.
I'm like, you
Yeah.
know what? You call the school. And sometimes, listen, sometimes it's how can we get the goal done? And sometimes it's we will not be completing any homework until January or whatever.
Yeah.
And then we reserve the right to revisit.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you just have to be kind of a jerk sometimes, if that's what it feels like. And sometimes this is another fascinating, I find this a fascinating topic, which is like um, being in the position to choose your child and their needs over, and I hear this is what you're doing in your practice, right? Over the expectations that are being thrust upon you from society, from school, from teachers, from authority figures, from
Yep.
whoever, society writ large. There
Yep.
is this moment of truth. We see it all the time in our Orchid Kids classes too, which is like, oh, this like just kind of ride down the river of what Instagram says parenting and childhood is supposed to look like is not my reality.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, now we got to change some stuff. And it's to me like it's funny, I'm not going to be able to put it into words, but I do have this very clear image of a parent stepping into their child's corner or their child's
Mm-hmm.
space
Yeah.
and leading from there
Yeah.
rather than from the what ends up being the opposite side of the fence in some ways.
Yes. 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 And, you know, this idea of like having to be a jerk sometimes, there's both like a truth in that, that like sometimes I'm just going to need to have a little attitude and say, as you said, we're not doing that. And also, you know, disproportionately, the folks that are working with you and I supporting this are moms.
Yep.
Shout out
Yep.
to all the dads doing amazing things, but let's be real, it disproportionately falls to moms, both the logistics and the worry and all of that.
Yep.
And there's also this narrative around like, I'm being difficult, I'm being that parent. And the amount of times that I hear that. And so, permission slip here, be that parent, because why are you being that parent? For your kid. And again, I touched briefly, school was really hard for me. And I used to say I was bad at school, but I realize now that's not what it was. School wasn't designed for a learner like me. And the reason I am where I am today is because somebody was always in my corner, so to speak, as you said. And people were willing, my mom in particular, was willing to be a jerk sometimes and say, nope, we're not doing that. And I am so grateful for that. But I'm sure it wasn't easy. And you know, you can get an eye roll from the school and they can say you're that parent. But I'm doing it for my child and it doesn't need to be bad. So that stereotype and story that can come up to with women like being the difficult one. I hate that that plays a part in that. And again, I want to admit that that could be there for many of us too. Like, oh, am I being that parent? Am I making it harder for them? You know, that's a
Yeah.
reality. And
And
that comes
then
up in my coaching a lot.
all the time. And then if you're a sensitive adult who
Oh
was
yeah.
a sensitive child
Hmm.
who, you know, had their ass handed to them by somebody who didn't understand what even was happening. No,
Yep.
no, just go have your feelings somewhere else, right? All that stuff is coming up, literally
Yep.
all of it. And, you know, I love this expression about our kids know exactly what buttons to push. Well, you know, yeah, our children were tailor made for our buttons.
Yep.
Like no other child on the planet can push the buttons that your child can push.
Yes.
And they're doing it like all naturally, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yep.
that's part of like, you know, and there's a whatever kind of a woo component to this, which is like, you know, when you have kids, be ready, because that is like your ultimate growth opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Right, where like all that stuff is coming up and playing a part in now you're both the child and the adult in the equation.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Which is why I say, like, we can't have this conversation and pretend that we're just talking about your child and that's it, like they're in this silo, right? Like, come on, let's give yourself some credit. You're trying all these things. You're having emotions about it. You know, I ask some really specific questions sometimes. One I say is like, how would it feel if there is a diagnosis in place? What would it feel like to tell your mother and father-in-law, like, so the child, right? Martha was diagnosed with autism today. Martha, like, what does that feel like in your body? Are you scared to say that? Do you feel shame? Do you feel confident as hell? Like, what is, let's dig in there,
Mhm.
because there's work to be done there that will support you and your kid over the years. It doesn't just, you don't have to set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. You can get, you can be supported at the same time.
You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. I mean, if that's
Yeah.
not against all tenets of motherhood, I don't know what it is.
Right? Right? And
Isn't that what
we're
we're
talking,
supposed to do?
I know. And we're talking, you and I do, like, our work is related but different. And you could plug in a lot of things here. You could talk about a child with specific medical needs. You could talk about a child that needs, feeding help, or like, it could be anything.
Yeah.
Um this same idea that it's impacting everyone. So let's address it with everyone. What does it mean if you have to drive one child to 4 appointments a week? How are the siblings feeling about that? Right? Is there an impact there? Have we addressed that? Like, just all of those pieces.
I hang out on some of the autism mommy Facebook groups, and this came up recently where like somebody was like, I am about to quit my neurotypical child's baseball like I'm going to ask my neurotypical child to quit baseball because it's very hard for me to leave the house. A little bit of a different flavor here, but very hard for me to leave the house with my neurodivergent kid. Do
Yeah.
you have, when you have families where, you know, with siblings, what are some common things that you see, and what are some things you suggest?
Yeah. So, especially with reading, it's always interesting if the older sibling struggles and then the younger sibling comes along and just learns how to read. That older sibling all of a sudden is like, what? So that's a big one. We talk about that a lot, because the parents might say like, oh, well, these books would work for both levels, and yeah, but your 12-year-old might not want to read what your 6-year-old's reading. Let's talk about that.
Right.
Um, One thing that comes up here, and actually the person that connected you and I have talked to her about this, is as a parent, I think there's a little bit of, this is going to sound like a strong word, but stay with me, a little bit of mourning involved in a situation
Oh,
like that. So if you have to
absolutely.
say, we're not the family that can just spontaneously go out to eat at a restaurant on a school night because of X, Y, and Z needs of one or more of my children, that may have been part of your vision when you became a parent, and all of a sudden you can't do that. There's a little like, I want to give you some time and space to kind of feel that.
Mhm.
Or, we're not the family that can go stay in a hotel for a weekend because of the needs we need at bedtime. Or, right, there are things that maybe you just thought came with parenting, and now all of a sudden you can't do them.
Yeah.
So, again, I just want to give validation and time and space to name that. And I usually start with parents, but then it often does lead to the sibling relationship. And, parents will initially, oh, I feel so bad. I never even asked them. It's okay. You're here now. Let's talk to them, right? What does that look like for them? If baseball's really their thing, what are we talking about asking them to give up? Is there another option? Is this a forever thing? Because that's another big one. I often talk to parents about, like, say that really baseball does need to go right now for that sibling. Is that forever? Or is that for the season? So many things are, I like as a parent very much to think of things in seasons. Like, yes, I need my children to learn how to swim because I think it's a life skill, but like, that's not in the cards this season for us because we're doing some other things. we will do swim lessons, but not this season. So that too, I think is really helpful for first parents to get there and then to share that with siblings.
Mhm.
Like this is a really hectic season and we are saying no to some things. What are some things we can say yes to in the spring or summer? Let's talk about that. What might that look like? As they get older, right? They can go to practice with a teammate or a classmate and things, other options open up. But you as the parent, I think, and then siblings need some time and space to just recognize like, this is hard. It's hard to go to the playground with my little brother because of what he needs. It's not like when my friends go to the playground with their little brother. Like, I don't want parents to be scared to hold space for their kids to have that conversation and to be annoyed, mourn, a little ticked off. Like, that's okay.
Yeah.
I think that's okay.
It's so interesting, right? It's like I think particularly when there are siblings, we feel like one child is being shortchanged the childhood that they're supposed to have.
Mhm.
And there is, I don't think mourning is too strong a word. There is a period that I do think that, the stages of grief and mourning absolutely apply when we're talking about the diagnosis of a child, in terms of particularly with a persistent lifelong
Yes.
diagnosis.
Yes.
Even if that diagnosis, and the one that comes to mind is always autism, but even if that diagnosis is dyslexia,
Yes.
honestly,
Yes.
right? And so there is this period of like, and you go through all the stages. I'm not going to list them here. People can look them up, but um, but this notion that that one of your children was supposed to have a different experience
Mm.
is very it's both alluring and also really damaging, I think,
Mhm.
because that's not the experience they're having.
Yep.
And
It should have been a different way.
it
Mhm.
should have been a different way. And to deny or pretend or whatever, construct this alternative reality is not doing anybody any favors, because it's making you crazy because you're trying to construct it. And
Yeah.
then it's denying the reality of the child. Now we're sort of gaslighting our
Yeah.
right neurotypical child, or even either one of them, who knows, right?
Sure. Sure.
Because we're not validating their lived experience. So
Mhm.
now they think their lived experience is wrong, which, like, what does that
Yeah.
even mean?
Right. It's their lived experience, right? And we could unintentionally be putting that on them. Yeah.
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 I
So,
mean,
I mean, I have two kiddos and some of the things they say about each other are not always the nicest, you can imagine. They're siblings. But I even just in typical sibling relationship, on a regular old day, like I find myself things like you can be annoyed with her. You can be really mad at her right now. Like I'm not gonna say you're never gonna hear me saying, don't be mad at your sister. That's taking all the attention right now, or that's requiring all this. Again, I think of like feeding as an example. I think um like if you have a extreme picky eater,
mhm.
it can impact a lot because food can be so social. It can impact a lot of things. It can impact kids' birthday parties or the family gatherings or holidays.
Yeah.
And I think it's a big one that parents don't realize how much stress it was putting on them. I do realize this because it's very personal.
Mm,
Um, so, like, what is that impact and what does that look like? Again, for the parent, for the child who may be an extreme picky eater, and then for the siblings. What does that mean? Are we missing out on those things? Do they look different? Is there a stigma to how different they look? How are we handling that? If we roll up with our own food, right, at Thanksgiving, who's judging us? And how am I can't control that whole dynamic, but I certainly can talk to all of my kids about why we're making the decision we are to come in with our own food for whatever that is. So again, it's not just a diagnosis, medical or learning related. It really could be anything that feels like it's veered from this what we were told it should be or imagined it should be. And I would say like anything that kind of requires extra work, extra emotional labor and planning on behalf of the parents, which again falls disproportionately to moms.
right, right.
Yeah,
We could talk all day long.
we sure could.
Yeah.
We sure could. I feel like another time we could go down a totally different path and do a whole other episode, which I would love to do. But I hope, at least for now, parents are taking these permission slips and using them.
Or just like hand them out. You can have
Yep.
one, you get a permission slip, and you get a permission slip.
Yep. Yep. I mean, honestly, the number of times somebody says, I learned about your services 2 months ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago, and I just couldn't act immediately. And right away, I'm giving them a high five. Like, good. You weren't ready then. That's not what you needed then. There were other things going on then. And now here we are. Let's talk.
Ah,
Permission
so much
granted.
permission. Yeah, so much
Hmm.
permission to just
Hmm.
like muddle through,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah.
really, we all need a little bit of grace. So you are giving that grace to lots of
Yes.
people. It's fantastic.
Yes. Yes.
If people want to get a hold of you, where do they do that?
Yeah, I am most active on Instagram at Grounded Learning. And then my email is martha@groundedlearningdc.com. Website, groundedlearningdc.com as well. And yeah, I am accepting coaching clients at the moment and really love working with families to dig into all of this. So if someone's listening and this resonates, please, please reach out.
Fantastic. Martha, we will
Thank you
have
so
you
much for having
back.
me.
Thank you for being here. This was a treat.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.